Hey, and welcome to another episode of the CIRS Group podcast. I'm Jacie,
And I'm Barbara.
and today we are talking about the diagnostic blood markers for CIRS.
It's very exciting.
It is. Before we jump in, we just want to remind everyone that Barbara and I have gone through CIRS treatment. We have a community of people who are healing from CIRS. We've read the textbook, but we are not medical providers, so none of this should be taken as medical advice. This is just our experience with the topic of CIRS.
And with that, I'm sure, well, I feel like the blood markers are always this like big mountain to climb when you're first when you think you might have CIRS. There's all of this alphabet soup of markers that you need to have checked, and they're not usually checked. And some people will look at you funny when you ask for them for these ask to be tested. So yeah, let's I think this is a good one for y'all if you're curious about what all these blood markers mean and like why you're getting them tested.
Yes, so these blood markers are part of what you would have done as a part of getting diagnosed with CIRS. So typically they do a blood draw and they're looking for two things. One is the haplotypes associated with CIRS, so you can see that genetic susceptibility. But then the second part of the blood work are these markers, and they show it's kind of different from like autoimmune blood markers in that it's not looking for adaptive immune response. It's not looking for antibodies. It's actually looking for your innate immune response. And that's what CIRS is activation of your innate immune system that then isn't able to transition over to the adaptive immune system, which would create antibodies and help you eliminate the biotoxin. So these are really specific blood markers associated with CIRS. And for me personally, it was part of the reason I had such buy-in with the Shoemaker protocol when I first heard about it, was because it is so specific. It's not just looking for general inflammation, it's looking for really specific markers. So the first one we're going to talk about today is MMP9, and this one is a marker that'll show the blood-brain barrier permeability. And so a lot of people who have high MMP9 will notice that they have a lot of neuroinflammation, they have a lot of reactivity. These people will also very often experience that the binders are harder to tolerate, and that's because they have that permeability in their brain. So they're just going to be more affected by medications that they take.
And just for fun, because I want to say it, MMP9 stands for matrix metallopeptidase 9. Did I do that right?
You just went for it, because I was like, I'm just going to go with the initials because there's no way I'm going to say that publicly and mess it up and have people in the comments telling me how to say it correctly.
Metallopeptidase. Like there's like a sing-song quality to it. I don't know. I just remember at one point early on that I really tried to pronounce that correctly, so I needed to bring that back out. So I'm glad.
No, I love that, and I feel like we're all going to remember it now.
There we go. I noticed with my MMP9 it actually went up, so it got worse, I will say, over the course of treatment. And my practitioner had recommended or had asked me, oh, are you taking your omega-3s or your high dose fish oil? And I said, not as reliably and consistently as I should. And she's like, that's probably what's causing this. So she reiterated to me to make sure I'm taking what I'm taking, which is Omaprem. So that's my one thing that I'll add to that.
Yeah, another good point. So to treat high MMP9, it's typically the omega-3s and then the low amylose diet. So especially when you get, this is one of the blood markers that's corrected later on in the Shoemaker protocol. And this is when your provider may recommend to you a low amylose diet. And they have found that this blood marker is corrected by eating low amylose.
There you go.
The next one is VEGF, which I think is vasoepithelial growth factor.
I have it here. It's vascular endothelial growth factor.
I'm just making up stuff.
Okay.
I feel like it was kind of close. I don't know.
No, it was really
close. What epithelial means now.
Yeah, and right, endo instead of epo. Anyway,
I'm gonna have to look that up. This one is associated with vascularity, pulmonary issues. So people with chronically high VEGF may find that their symptoms include like a difficulty in breathing. For me, I have high VEGF. It's something we have had to work really hard to correct for myself. It just feels harder to breathe. Like it's really hard to explain. It's not like I can't take a full breath. I can take a full breath, but it feels like I'm not getting all of that air. And so to correct high VEGF, or it might be low VEGF, this is a good time to bring up that my favorite resource for looking at the CIRS blood markers is the hoffmancenter.com has this amazing, super comprehensive write-up about the CIRS blood markers. We'll leave it in the show notes for everyone because I reference it all of the time, and I'm pretty sure it's low VEGF, not high VEGF. But if it's out of range, which covers my butt, the way that this is fixed is, again, the omega-3s, just getting through the treatment and eliminating the biotoxins, but then also scaling up your exercise over time. So this was huge for me. I would always get that push and crash phenomenon. When I would try and work out, I would push because I felt good, and then I would crash and then not work out for several days. And it was just this awful cycle of pushing and crashing. But if you very slowly scale up your exercise, so like walk 5 minutes a day, then the next week 10 minutes a day, then the next week 12 minutes a day. It's painful if you're someone who does like to be active, but it actually helps you in the long run because you are able to tolerate that exercise long term. And just for context, now I'm up to, 45-minute walks every day and 20 minutes of resistance training 5 times a week.
Good job. And I do think that it's a good marker to track. Unfortunately, I did not get my VEGF tested until very recently, and it was very low. So that kind of makes sense. And I've always had that. I think the doctors, I remember a doctor telling me when I was young that I had like exercise induced asthma just because it like hurt to breathe whenever I would do anything. And that's always my excuse for not doing cardio and all kinds of stuff like that. But that really makes sense to me. So that's clicking for me right here as we record. But that is not a marker that I tested early on, unfortunately. So I only have my recent results on that, but I did just get some more blood work in the last week. So we'll see if that improved at all. But
also, shout out to the doctor that when you, as a child, told them it hurts to breathe, they said, oh, it's exercise-induced asthma. How do doctors live with themselves? I don't know.
Yep. It's broken, guys. The system's broken. Anyway.
The next blood marker is TGF beta 1 or trans growth factor beta 1. This one, if it's high, is very closely associated with joint pain, tissue remodeling, but typically we always talk about those like CIRS hallmark kind of like manifestations where for you it was GI, for me it was joint pain. And you can see this in TGF beta 1. You can really see the joint pain associated with the TGF beta 1.
Yeah, and that makes sense for me because mine has been low or under, within range, if we want to call it that. And so I do have a couple things that come up, especially if I go off carnivore, very specifically, like my knee decides to yell at me or plantar fasciitis starts to freak out. And I don't know if that is, I know it's not joint, but is that kind of in the same category, would you say?
Yes. So okay. We say joint pain, but really it's inflammation of tendons and ligaments that are pulling on those joints. And so it can cause joint pain. But what you're experiencing with plantar fasciitis is enthesis, what I had when I had my ankylosing spondylitis. Yeah. So yeah, it's just inflammation of those tendons and ligaments. And so kind of to that end, treating TGF beta 1 is very much that low amylose diet, treating the rest of the protocol up until that point. And then there's like this like last ditch effort medication that your provider can prescribe to you if you really can't get that number down.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it, as you said, I do not really, especially compared to you, I don't really deal with joint pain or any kind of tendon, other issues. And my TGF markers reflect that.
The other thing I wanted to mention about this one is LabCorp recently changed the ranges. So on Hoffman Center, this is another point. Hoffman Center is in Canada, so I can't speak to the ranges on there being accurate for the US. When we say it's a really good resource, I mean more for just like looking at what the blood markers mean and how it might manifest in your body and how the providers treat it. But the TGF beta 1, it was back in June, I believe, that they changed the ranges. So if you had your TGF beta 1 taken before then and after then, those numbers aren't from LabCorp. Those numbers might not be comparable. I just wanted to mention that because I went to my provider. I got blood drawn in July and my TGF beta 1 was super high. And she was like, oh, we can do nothing with this number because it doesn't mean anything because the range has changed. And I was like, you took 22 vials of my blood. Why did we take this?
Oh man. I'm excited to dig into the next one because it's so controversial. Good old MSH.
MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone. So I recently did a class on what is CIRS in the CIRS group, and I spent way too much time on the biotoxin pathway. The biotoxin pathway, if you haven't like looked at it and you have CIRS, it's fascinating because it shows you how it's multi-system, multi-symptom. Because I think a lot of people with CIRS are like, okay, that's every symptom, but it's very specifically these symptoms mostly because of MSH. So what happens is your body has this encounter with a biotoxin. It understands it's a foreign body, but not how to remove it. And so your body releases the innate immune system, part of which is these inflammatory proteins called cytokines. The cytokines are very sticky and they stick to the leptin receptors in your pituitary gland, which then impacts your ability to generate MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone. And if you heard this, you would think, oh, melanocyte, melanin, it just impacts my skin. But no, this hormone is a key hormone. It impacts so many different parts of your body. If you haven't seen the biotoxin pathway, definitely check it out because you can see how it impacts like melatonin and then therefore it can disrupt your sleep cycles. It disrupts sex hormone production and therefore can affect things like your libido or for women, their periods. We have a whole episode about that. So this hormone is like so important in so many different functions of the human body. So if your MSH is low, it's typically why a lot of us have the symptoms that we do.
Yes. And I have to say, I don't even know if this is necessarily good advice because all of these markers are important and several of them are needed for diagnosis officially. But if I have somebody who is CIRS curious and doesn't want to jump into the deep end of this, like could be about $1,000, if it's not covered by insurance, blood, and might even be more, blood workup, I always say, at least check your MSH. Like I feel at least do that because chances are it's, if you have some major issues like leaky gut, hormone issues, something isn't right, especially if you are carnivore and you're doing all the things like you're sleeping well and you're drinking all the water and you have electrolytes and you're doing all the stuff that we're supposed to do. I almost said sunning your balls, and then I did anyway. But if you're doing all the things and you still don't feel good, check your MSH at the very least. I'm glad that I was able to have that moment for you. I say these things so for much. Jacie. That's why I'm doing it. But yeah, MSH is just it's so key to like everything, and it's what is it in like 80% or more of people with CIRS have like low or undetectable MSH. So it's a really good, like if you really are scared of doing the whole blood work thing, like throw in MSH next time you get your cholesterol panel or whatever it is that's, easy for you to take that you do. That would be my big recommendation.
Interestingly, in the Surviving Mold Shoemaker group, there's no consensus on whether or not you can raise MSH, whether or not it's important to do that to fully heal. It's also controversial about whether or not you can impact this number at all. I did find that by laying out in the sun every day, and I kind of had to do the scaling up thing like for exercise with the push and crash because I was having histamine reactions to the sun. So I had to slowly build up a solar callus. I'd said that in quotes for anyone who's listening and not viewing. By exposing myself to sun in small doses and then building a callus so it could be out there longer. But there are a couple studies that show that getting UV light can stimulate MSH. So I was just operating under the assumption that A, sunshine feels good, and B, it might be helpful for this. And my MSH did raise. So that would be the one thing I would suggest if someone's kind of looking for something they might be able to do at home to start feeling better, is see if you can get some sunshine in.
Yeah. And I don't know that, again, I'll say it, even though you said it earlier, not a doctor, not a medical provider. This is not medical advice, but I have a very limited way of getting sun here, even though I live in Las Vegas. So I actually have been doing tanning for almost a year. Like, it's been a while, but I have my blood markers up just for reference, and my MSH started at undetectable back in April of 2022. And then by December of that year, it had gone up to 13.7. And then in August of this year, it was 15.9. So it's slowly creeping up. So I've been tanning relatively regularly. It doesn't look like it right now, but I have, and I think so I'm also proof that MSH can raise, at least in my situation, and in your situation it has. So, and I'm still holding on a little bit to that holy grail, if you will, of trying to get my MSH as high as possible in order to hopefully repair my leaky gut situation. So that's, I don't know if I'll be able to, and maybe there are other paths to that end result, but that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, and check out the biotoxin pathway too, because you talked about MSH repairing your leaky gut, and that's because MSH regulates the tight junctions of your gut. So leaky gut is that those junctions aren't tight. So yeah, raising MSH could only help with that. So yeah, definitely check out the biotoxin pathway if you want to nerd out a little bit about the symptoms associated with CIRS. But the next blood marker we're going to talk about is, it's two. It's C4A and C3A. These are complements, and they are a direct response to foreign bodies in your body. So C4A is typically indicative of mycotoxin, mold, endotoxin, actino exposure. So mycotoxins being mold, endotoxins being like sewagey stuff, and then actinos being the bacteria that love to eat both of those things plus dead human skin, but they are the what do they call it? The chemical soup associated with water damaged buildings. And then C3A is typically, if that's high, that's associated with Lyme or other co-infections like EBV. It helps with two things. One, it can help you see if you've been in exposure, and it can also help you tell what kind of exposure you're in. So if C4A is high, it's more likely you have water damage exposure, whereas if the C3A is high, you're more likely to have Lyme exposure. And then you can double check that thing with things like the Genie and the NeuroQuant. But that's what these numbers are, and they're a pain in the butt because at least my provider insists they go through Jewish National, which means I have to go to a specific place to get the blood drawn. I can't get it done at, LabCorp or Quest.
Yeah, that's annoying. It's already stressful to get your blood drawn, specifically for you, but really for anyone. And to have to go to a different place. That is one thing I'll throw in here. Almost everyone who gets their blood drawn for CIRS does not successfully do it completely the first time they go. And that's because of these special tests that people have never heard of, that they've never done, even at these big companies like Quest and LabCorp. But
they don't have the additives, or they don't have the right tube.
Yeah, or they don't have a way to freeze it the way it needs to be frozen at this particular facility. You have to go to the main one over across town, which is what I was told when I was first when I first got tested. So there's a couple ways you can go about doing that. You can call ahead, and I've done that where I've read off the codes for every one of the tests and had them check that they could do all of them. And that helps if you want to take the time to do that, or you just show up and hope, have them do what they can. And then if you have to go somewhere else, then you have to go somewhere else, and you do that on a different day. So
I wing it.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever your style is, do that, and just know that that's probably going to happen, and don't be too disheartened by that. That's very normal, unfortunately, with these tests.
Well, I hope this episode helped you better understand why this blood work is taken. I remember when I first saw the list, you called it an alphabet soup, which is amazing and delightful, because it is. It's MMP9 and VEGF and TGF and MSH and C4A. It's just like, just every letter. Just take
Yeah.
every letter, please. But they are all very specific in terms of identifying CIRS and the CIRS that you are experiencing as a human being and your individual symptoms. So hopefully this gave you more context for that. And if you are looking for more resources and support on your CIRS journey, you can join us over at the cirsgroup.com.
Yep. See you there.